All right, it is time for vocabulary. We have 2 more words that we're going to add to our vocabulary list today. So they're going to be temperature and heat, closely related, but a little bit different. So we're going to go ahead here and focus in on our first word, which is temperature. You're starting to write down that temperature, a word we all know, but you may not know the scientific definition. Temperature is a measure, it's a measurement. Temperature is a measure of the average kinetic energy. Oh, this is where it's different than what you might have thought. Temperature is a measure of the average kinetic energy of the atoms in an object. Temperature is a measure of the average kinetic energy of the atoms in an object. So what I'm going to write here in the details, something important to know, is that whenever we see a temperature that's a high temperature number, like maybe it's 80 degrees, or maybe you've cooked something and it's 100 degrees. Anytime we see a high temperature number, what that equals, or what that means, is it means that we have fast moving atoms. So the number that we see as the temperature is actually telling us what the atoms are doing. So if we ever see a high temperature, it means we have very fast moving atoms. And vice versa, if we see a low temperature number, like it's 50 degrees in the morning, then that means the atoms outside are moving slower. So what I'm going to do here is the picture is I'm going to draw the tool that we typically use to measure temperature, which is a thermometer, and I'm going to kind of label that what the thermometer is telling us, what temperature is it's telling us about atom speed. So I'm going to start by drawing my thermometer, right? And most of you know it's got this kind of skinny shape, and then it's got this like bulb kind of circular shape at the bottom. And thermometers don't have mercury in them anymore. They're filled with a kind of a different kind of liquid, right? And we know that the temperature has little grid marks on it. And what we're going to write down here is that this tells us atom speed. So when you look at a thermometer, that thermometer is actually measuring the speed of the atoms, right? So if you take your own temperature, it means you're measuring how fast the atoms in your body are moving. If you take the temperature of the air, you're measuring how fast the atoms in the air are moving. And again, that might be something you never realized before. I'm also just going to add to my picture the word KE, which we now know is an abbreviation for kinetic energy. So temperature tells us about kinetic energy. Now, closely related to that, and this is where people sometimes get confused, is we have this other scientific word called heat. And heat is the movement. Heat is a movement. It's something that's moving. So heat is the movement of thermal energy. Heat is the movement of thermal energy from a warmer object to a cooler object. In science, heat is the movement of thermal energy from a warmer object to a cooler object. So what we're going to write in the details here is why this happens. And again, it has to do with the atoms. And it happens because fast-moving atoms are going to spread out, which means they're going to move from one place to another. So in the details, we're going to write happens because fast-moving atoms. It happens because fast-moving atoms spread outward. Spread outward. So this explains why thermal energy is going to move. right? Because atoms that are moving fast, they're going to spread outward, so they're going to go to different places, whether that place is the air, whether it's the chair you're sitting in. So heat happens because fast-moving atoms spread outward. So I'm going to draw an example of this using a pretty common material, something like hot chocolate or coffee. We know that if we have a mug, I'm going to draw a mug here. And there's its handle, right? If we have a mug of, let's say this is hot cocoa, okay, or hot chocolate, we know that it is going to be warm, right? It's going to be hot. And we're going to get steam that rises up into the cool air. So this movement out of the hot chocolate into the air is heat, right? Because we're going from a place that's warm to a place that is cool. So that whole thing, right, of the steam rising, that is heat, because it's the movement of thermal energy from a warmer object to a cooler object. And again, this happens because the atoms in the hot chocolate, they're moving fast. And some of those hot chocolate atoms are moving so fast that they fly out of the liquid hot chocolate and they come up into the air because they want to spread out and move away. So again, this week we're really going to be focusing on temperature and heat. We're going to look at what happens to atoms when we add energy to them. And then we're also going to start to look at, well, what are some ways we can move heat? Because there's different ways we move heat depending on if it's a solid, liquid, or gas. All right, I'm going to leave that up there if you need to finish it up.